Close your eyes, feel the weight of your body settle. Let the present moment fade away. Now, step backward through time. Not years, not centuries, but thousands of years. Keep going, further, deeper into the past. Millions of years dissolve like mist. You are standing somewhere you have never been. Somewhere no modern human has stood in living memory. Open your eyes. You are on the edge of a shallow inland sea, somewhere in what will one day be called North America. The water is warm, 32 degrees Celsius. The sky is a shade of blue that does not exist in any photograph. The air smells of salt and ancient vegetation, thick with oxygen and unfamiliar pollen. Behind you, the land rises into dense, cathedral-like forest. The trees are not trees you would recognize. The ferns stand 3 meters tall. The cycads crowd the riverbanks like sentinels made of green fire. And then, you hear it, a sound that no living human has ever truly heard. A deep, resonant call, low and rhythmic. It rolls across the water like a wave of bass thunder. You turn. And there, moving through the shallows no more than 400 meters from where you stand, is a Triceratops. Not an artist's reconstruction, not a museum skeleton, a living animal. It is 9 meters long. It weighs somewhere between 6 and 12 metric tons. Its 3 horns catch the light of an amber afternoon sun. It moves slowly with the unhurried authority of an animal that has no natural predator in its immediate vicinity. The ground vibrates faintly beneath your feet. This is the late Cretaceous. The year, if we were to translate this moment into our calendar, is approximately 66 million years and 90 days before the present. 90 days, that is what remains. In 90 days, something will arrive. Something that has been traveling through the darkness of space for millions of years. A rock, just a rock. Roughly 12 kilometers wide, moving at approximately 20 kilometers per second. When it strikes the shallow waters of what will become the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, it will release energy equivalent to 10 billion Hiroshima atomic bombs. The impact will create a crater 180 kilometers across and nearly 20 kilometers deep. The shockwave will be felt globally within hours. The sky will turn dark within days. The temperature will plummet. The food chains will collapse. Within 76,000 years of that single moment, approximately 75% of all species on Earth, including every non-avian dinosaur, will be gone. Erased. Removed from the story of life on this planet as completely as a sentence struck from a book. This is, by any measure, one of the most dramatic events in the 4.5 billion year history of the Earth. It is the line between 2 worlds, before and after, the Mesozoic and the Cenozoic, the age of reptiles and the age of mammals, and it was caused entirely by a rock. A rock that, on any other trajectory, on any other morning in the deep mathematical silence of the solar system, would have drifted harmlessly past. A rock that nearly did not arrive at all. Because the window of impact, the precise moment when the Earth and that asteroid occupied the same point in space, was extraordinarily narrow. Our calculations suggest that if the asteroid had arrived even 30 minutes earlier or 30 minutes later, the Earth would have continued rotating to a different point of impact, and the angle and depth of that strike would have been fundamentally altered. The sulfur-rich rocks that amplified the climate catastrophe would not have been struck. The world might have trembled, recovered, and continued. Consider what was lost. In 90 days, the Triceratops in the shallows before you will cease to exist. Its lineage, stretching back through the Cretaceous in an unbroken chain of deep time, will be severed. Gone, too, will be every hadrosaur moving in vast herds across the fern prairies of Laramidia. Gone will be the immense, armored form of Ankylosaurus, plodding through the undergrowth with the patience of stone. Gone will be the last great sauropods, their long necks sweeping the canopy of the low forests. Gone will be the mosasaurs in the warm inland sea behind you, those magnificent elongated predators who had turned the ancient ocean into their private dominion. Gone will be the pterosaurs from the sky, the great flying reptiles who had held dominion over the air for over 150 million years. All of it. Gone. In geological terms, it will be an instant. In ecological terms, it will be an annihilation without parallel in the history of complex life on Earth. But you are here now, 90 days before that event, and in this moment, this world is alive. It hums with a complexity and richness that we have barely begun to understand. The Triceratops wades deeper, its enormous frill flushing a faint, brilliant orange as it moves into the afternoon light, a display of something. Literatory or awareness or simple life. The inland sea stretches to the horizon, calm and gold. Behind you, the forest stirs with the movement of something enormous, a shape too large for the undergrowth, parting the ferns with a weight that makes the ground drum. It is a Tyrannosaurus rex, 7 tons of predator, moving with surprising quietude through the tree line. Its eyes, forward-facing, binocular, calculating, lock for a moment onto the Triceratops in the shallows. The two animals regard each other across the distance. The world holds still. This is the late Cretaceous. This is the edge of forever. And the question that will carry us through the hours ahead is not simply what happened next in history. The question is larger. The question is quieter. The question reaches across 66 million years of time and asks, what if it had not happened at all? What if, on that morning 66 million years ago, the rock missed? What if the dinosaurs never fell? What if they had 66 million more years, the same span of time that separates us from that very Triceratops in the shallows, to continue evolving, adapting, diversifying? What would have emerged from such an extraordinary expanse of time? What would be walking this earth today? What would be thinking? What would be building? What would be dreaming? And, the quietest question of all, would we be here to ask? If you enjoy journeys like this one, consider subscribing. There is much more waiting for you. To understand the magnitude of what did not happen in our alternate story, we must first examine, in careful, yet honest detail, the science of what actually occurred. The story of the asteroid's discovery is, in itself, a remarkable chapter in scientific history, beginning not in a remote desert or a deep ocean trench, but in the delicate stratigraphy of an Italian limestone cliff. In 1977, the geologist Walter Alvarez was studying the rocks near the town of Gubbio in central Italy when he noticed something unusual. At the precise geological boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene periods, the layer that marks the end of the age of dinosaurs, there was a thin, dark band of clay, strikingly different from the pale limestone above and below it. This band was clearly the product of a dramatically different depositional event. Something had interrupted the normal process of geological sedimentation at this boundary. Alvarez brought samples of this clay to his father, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Luis Alvarez, and together they conducted a chemical analysis that would change the course of scientific history. The results were stunning. The clay was extraordinarily rich in iridium, an element that is vanishingly rare in the Earth's crust, where it concentrates at levels of roughly 0.001 parts per billion in most rock formations, but which is found in far greater abundance in extraterrestrial bodies, particularly asteroids. In the boundary clay at Gubbio, the iridium concentration was between 30 and 160 times the normal background level. The Alvarez father and son team published their hypothesis in the journal Science in 1980. A massive asteroid had struck the Earth at the end of the Cretaceous period, and the resulting catastrophe had driven the mass extinction. The hypothesis was initially met with enormous skepticism. Critics pointed out that no impact crater of sufficient size had been identified. Competing theories, including dramatic volcanic activity, were proposed to explain the iridium anomaly. Paleontologists who had studied the gradual decline of certain dinosaur lineages in the final million years of the Cretaceous were reluctant to accept such a sudden, catastrophic narrative. The debate within the scientific community was intense, sustained, and highly productive. It drove an extraordinary generation of research. Then, in 1991, the smoking gun was found. The geophysicist Alan Hildebrand, working with geologist Glenn Penfield, confirmed the existence of a buried geological structure beneath the waters and sediments of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The Chicxulub crater, named after the small coastal town of Puerto Chicxulub near its center, measured approximately 180 kilometers in diameter and plunged nearly 20 kilometers into the Earth's crust. The structure showed all the hallmarks of a catastrophic hypervelocity impact: shocked quartz crystals, melt glass, a circular arrangement of gravitational anomalies, and a central uplift dome characteristic of large impact events. The Chicxulub impactor had been found. Subsequent work refined the chronology with extraordinary precision. In 2013, with the geochronologist Paul Wren and his team at the Berkeley Geochronology Center, applied argon-argon radiometric dating to tektite glass from the impact and ash layers from the Chicxulub boundary globally, pinpointing the impact to exactly 66.043 million years ago, with an uncertainty of merely 11,000 years. For reference, that margin of error is smaller than the span of recorded human civilization. The event was now anchored with extraordinary precision to a specific moment in deep geological time. The mechanics of the impact itself have been reconstructed in remarkable detail through a combination of geological evidence, computer modeling, and comparative planetology. The Chicxulub impactor was an asteroid or comet body of roughly 12 kilometers in diameter, approximately the distance from one end of a large city to the other. It entered the Earth's atmosphere traveling at approximately 20 kilometers per second, or more than 70,000 kilometers per hour. The total kinetic energy released at the moment of impact was roughly equivalent to 10 billion Hiroshima-scale atomic bombs, or approximately 100 teratons of TNT. The explosion was so powerful that it vaporized the impactor itself almost instantaneously, along with several kilometers of the surrounding target rock. A critical factor in the catastrophe's global severity was the geological nature of the impact site. The shallow, carbonate-rich platform rocks of the Yucatan were saturated with sulfur-bearing minerals, particularly anhydrite. When these rocks were vaporized by the impact energy, they released enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, quantities estimated at between 100 and 500 billion tons. This sulfur aerosol scattered incoming solar radiation with extraordinary efficiency, plunging global temperatures by an estimated 10 to 26 degrees Celsius within weeks to months. Added to the initial darkness caused by vast clouds of ejector dust and soot from continent-wide wildfires triggered by re-entering impact debris, the effect was a prolonged nuclear winter of devastating severity. A landmark 2017 computer modeling study, led by Joanna Morgan at Imperial College London and Gareth Collins and their collaborators, explored the critical role of the asteroid's impact angle. The study determined that the Chicxulub impact struck at an angle of approximately 60 degrees to the surface, which was, tragically for the Cretaceous biosphere, nearly the worst possible scenario for sulfur ejection. A shallower impact angle of around 30 degrees or a steeper angle approaching 90 degrees would have ejected significantly less sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. In other words, the precise angle of one rock striking one planet changed the course of 66 million years of biological evolution. The most visceral, immediate evidence of the catastrophe's opening moments came from the remarkable Tanis fossil site in North Dakota, documented in extraordinary detail by the paleontologist Robert De Palma and his team in a landmark 2019 paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Tanis represents a single frozen instant in time, the first hours following the impact. The site preserves a mass of organisms killed and buried by an enormous surge of river water triggered by the global seismic waves generated by the impact. In the gills of fish preserved at Tanis, researchers found tiny spherules of impact glass, tektites, confirming that the animals were alive and breathing when the ejecta from the impact was still raining down from the sky. The event captured at Tanis occurred within minutes to hours of the impact, over 3,000 kilometers from the crater itself. The broader extinction played out over a more extended timeline. The immediate physical destruction, the blast wave, the wildfires, the mega tsunami, was devastating but regionally variable. The truly global killer was the climate disruption. Photosynthesis collapsed as sunlight was blocked, a devastating plant life and cascading up through every food chain on the planet. Large animals with high metabolic demands were disproportionately affected. The non-avian dinosaurs, magnificent and dominant as they were, required vast quantities of food to sustain their body masses and were ecologically ill-equipped to survive a prolonged collapse of primary productivity. The extinction scope was staggering. An estimated 75% of all species on Earth perished in the geologically brief interval following the impact. The paleontologists David Raup and Jack Sepkoski, whose pioneering work in the 1980s quantified extinction rates through deep time, placed the end Cretaceous event as the second largest mass extinction in Earth's history, exceeded only by the catastrophic Permian-Triassic event of 252 million years ago, which eliminated an estimated 96% of all marine species. Yet, extinction is never total. Some organisms survived. The avian dinosaurs, the birds, possessed several key traits that helped them weather the catastrophe. Small body size, omnivory, the ability to cache food and seeds as a potential food source, even in a world without productive vegetation. Crocodilians survived in the low-oxygen, detritus-fed environments of river systems. Turtles, with their long fasting tolerances, persisted in muds and sediments. Small, burrowing, insectivorous mammals, the ancestors of every placental and marsupial mammal alive today, survived in the debris of a broken world. The key geological marker of this entire event, the iridium-rich layer of clay now known globally as the KPG boundary, has been identified at over 100 sites around the world, from Italy to New Zealand, from Denmark to Antarctica. It is, in a very real sense, the tombstone of the age of reptiles, a millimeter-thin line in the rock record, below which the fossils of dinosaurs are abundant and above which they are absent. A line drawn in stone across the face of the Earth by a single moment of cosmic chance. This is the science of the last day. These are the verified facts of the world's most dramatic reset. And it is against this background of hard, honest, established knowledge that our alternate story unfolds. Because the science also tells us something else, something that will become the foundation of everything that follows. The dinosaurs were not failing. They were not in decline. They were not worn out or evolutionarily exhausted. Right up to the moment of impact, the non-avian dinosaurs were among the most successful and ecologically dominant organisms the Earth had ever produced. They had been thriving for over 165 million years. They were, by any objective measure of evolutionary success, remarkable, and they were, in the late Cretaceous, continuing to diversify into new forms, occupying new ecological niches and, in at least some lineages, showing tentative but genuine signs of increasing neural complexity. The asteroid did not fell a failing dynasty. It erased a flourishing one. To truly understand what was at stake and what was preserved in our alternate story, we must dwell in the world of the late Cretaceous with patience and care. We must feel its heat, breathe its thick air, listen to its immense and living silences. Because this was not simply a different chapter in Earth's story. This was a fundamentally different planet, shaped by geography, climate, and biology into something so alien from our modern experience that to step into it would be, in almost every sensory dimension, like stepping onto another world entirely. The geography of the late Cretaceous Earth was radically different from the familiar arrangement of continents that we know today. The supercontinent Pangaea, which had dominated much of Earth's earlier Mesozoic history, had long since fragmented under the slow, inexorable forces of plate tectonics. By 66 million years ago, North America was no longer the unified landmass we recognize from our maps. A vast, shallow body of warm, tropical water, the Western Interior Seaway, divided the continent from north to south, running from what is now the Arctic Ocean all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. This inland sea, at its widest, roughly 1,000 kilometers across, divided North America into two distinct landmasses: the Western Territory of Laramidia, stretching from Alaska down to Mexico, and the Eastern Territory of Appalachia, a long, narrow strip of low-lying land following the line of the modern Appalachian Mountains. Laramidia was where the most spectacular concentration of large dinosaurian fauna was found, in ecosystems that have been preserved with extraordinary richness in the rock formations of the American West and Canada. The Hell Creek Formation, spanning parts of Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, represents a detailed snapshot of the coastline and river systems of Laramidia in its final million years. The Horseshoe Canyon Formation in Alberta, the Dinosaur Park Formation in the Red Deer River Valley, and the Lance Formation in Wyoming and Nebraska preserve adjacent and slightly earlier periods of this same Western world, painting a picture of an ecosystem of extraordinary complexity, abundance, and ecological dynamism. The climate that sustained all of this life was fundamentally, radically warmer than our modern world. There were no polar ice caps at the end of the Cretaceous period. The Arctic regions, rather than being covered in permanent ice and tundra, supported forest ecosystems and relatively diverse biological communities. Global average temperatures were estimated to be somewhere between 4 and 10 degrees Celsius higher than modern averages, creating a planet-wide greenhouse condition that had persisted for tens of millions of years. Sea levels sat roughly 170 meters higher than they do today as a consequence, not only of the warming itself, but of the absence of any major polar ice storage. The continental interiors were warm, wet, and highly productive, and the warm, shallow seas that covered so much of what we now think of as dry land teemed with extraordinary marine life. The atmosphere of the late Cretaceous was richer in carbon dioxide than our modern air. Concentrations hovered around 1,000 parts per million, compared to the 421 parts per million of our current atmosphere, itself already elevated by human activity. This elevated CO2 drove intense photosynthetic activity and supported the dense, layered vegetation that covered most of the land surface. The late Cretaceous was experiencing a biological revolution in its flora. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, were in the early stages of their extraordinary global radiation, beginning to colonize the undergrowth and riverbanks with an astonishing variety of forms and colors. But the dominant vegetation of the forests and open landscapes remained the ancient, deep-rooted lineages of the Mesozoic. Towering coniferous trees, reaching heights of 30 to 40 meters, broad stands of ferns creating impenetrable carpets beneath the forest canopy, and the slow, sculptural cycads standing in clusters along every waterway and coastal margin, their stiff, palm-like fronds unchanged in basic form for over 200 million years. In this world, Tyrannosaurus rex moved through the forest understory of the Hell Creek ecosystem with a combination of power and precision that would have been breathtaking to witness at close range. It was not the sluggish, tail-dragging creature of early popular imagination. Biomechanical analyses of its skeletal structure suggest a walking gait of approximately 4 to 12 kilometers per hour, with a well-balanced, forward-tilted body and a massive, muscular tail providing counterbalance to the great forward weight of the skull. The skull itself was a weapon of extraordinary engineering, up to 1.4 meters long, bearing a jaw capable of exerting bite forces of 35,000 to 57,000 newtons, among the highest measured for any land animal in Earth's history. So the teeth, banana-sized, deeply rooted and serrated, were not merely for cutting but for crushing, capable of penetrating and shattering bone to extract the nutrient-rich marrow within. Tyrannosaurus rex was not, as is sometimes implied, a solitary scavenger. Isotopic analyses of its bone chemistry and paleoecological modeling suggest it occupied the role of an apex predator, actively hunting large prey, possibly including the adults of the ceratopsid species that shared its range. Its eyes were forward-facing with a stereoscopic field of vision estimated at 55 degrees, wider than a modern hawk, providing the depth perception essential for a predator assessing the movement of large, powerful prey across variable terrain. Its olfactory bulbs, large and highly developed, made it an extraordinarily sensitive tracker of scent across long distances. It was, in the truest sense of the term, a supreme predator, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure into a near-perfect engine of predation at the large body scale. The most common large animal in the Hell Creek ecosystem was almost certainly not Tyrannosaurus rex, but the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, most notably Edmontosaurus annectans. These immense long-bodied animals reached lengths of 12 to 13 meters and weights of 3 to 4 tons, and they existed in numbers that likely dwarfed those of any other large herbivore in the ecosystem. Edmontosaurus moved in large, cohesive herds, migrating across the fern prairies and riverine corridors of Larimedia in patterns that may have tracked the seasonal availability of vegetation. Their jaws were equipped with a remarkable battery of hundreds of small, tightly packed teeth, capable of processing vast quantities of tough vegetation with extraordinary efficiency, and they could be replaced continuously throughout the animal's lifetime. Related hadrosaur species, such as the crested Parasaurolophus walkeri from the older Dinosaur Park Formation, possessed elaborate hollow cranial crests that served as resonating chambers for low-frequency vocalizations, deep, honking, resonant calls that would have carried across the forest for hundreds of meters, serving for communication within the herd, for mate attraction, or for warning of approaching predators. Sharing the lowland forests and coastal margins of the Hell Creek Formation with these great herbivores was Ankylosaurus magniventris, the most heavily armored dinosaur yet discovered. Measuring up to 8 meters in length and weighing an estimated 5 to 8 tons, Ankylosaurus was encased from its broad, flattened skull to the base of its powerful tail in a mosaic of thick, bony plates called osteoderms, set into a leathery skin and arranged in overlapping rows of protection. Even the top of its skull and the surfaces of its eyelids were armored. The tail terminated in a massive, fused club of solid bone, a weapon capable of delivering shattering impacts to the legs and feet of any predator foolish enough to approach without sufficient caution. Ankylosaurus was a low browser, its wide, flat skull held close to the ground to harvest the dense ferns and low-growing cycad fronds that carpeted the forest floor in dense, green abundance. Moving through the more open landscapes at the margins of the forest and the fern prairie corridors was the magnificent Triceratops horridus, arguably the most recognizable animal of the late Cretaceous. Triceratops was the most abundant large-bodied dinosaur in the Hell Creek Formation. Its fossils represent a significant proportion of the large vertebrate remains recovered from those sediments. An adult Triceratops measured up to 9 meters from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail and weighed between 6 and 12 metric tons, its great body supported on pillar-like legs of remarkable strength. Its facial structure was extraordinary even by Cretaceous standards. A large, solid nasal horn above the rostrum, 2 long brow horns sweeping forward and upward above the eyes, and a broad, the bony frill extending from the back of the skull over the neck. This frill was not merely protective armor, it was richly vascularized, capable of flushing with vivid coloration in response to hormonal changes, and it served in display, in thermoregulation, and possibly in the recognition of individuals within the population. Above the land-bound giants, the sky of the late Cretaceous was the domain of creatures no less extraordinary for their aerial existence. Pteranodon longiceps soared on the warm thermals rising from the surface of the western interior seaway with a wingspan of approximately 7 meters, roughly comparable to a modern great white pelican, though pterosaurs achieved flight through fundamentally different anatomical means, with wings formed from a membrane of skin and muscle stretched between the body, the hind limb, and an enormously elongated fourth finger. Pteranodon was a fish-eater, plunging its long, toothless beak into the warm waters of the seaway to capture the schools of fish that moved in vast shoals just below the surface. Its hollow, lightweight bones and the enormous surface area of its wings made it one of the most efficient soaring animals that has ever existed. But even Pteranodon was not the sky's largest occupant. That distinction belonged to Quetzalcoatlus northeuropae, discovered in Big Bend National Park in Texas in 1971 and named for the feathered serpent deity of Aztec mythology. Quetzalcoatlus was, by any measure, the largest flying animal in the history of life on Earth. With a wingspan estimated between 10 and 11 meters and a standing height when grounded equivalent to a modern adult giraffe, it was an animal of almost surreal scale. It fed by stalking across the coastal plains on 4-point contact, using its immense beak as a spear to seize large prey from the ground. Perhaps small dinosaurs, perhaps juvenile animals of various species, in a feeding style more analogous to a terrestrial stork than to a modern seabird. Beneath the surface of the western interior seaway, the world was no less magnificent, no less fierce, and no less alive. The seaway's warm, shallow waters, surface temperatures approaching 30 degrees Celsius, supported an extraordinarily rich marine ecosystem of fish, sharks, ammonites, and the great marine reptiles who held supreme dominion over those ancient waters. Mosasaurus hoffmanni was the apex predator of the open sea, a sleek, powerful, warm-adapted reptile reaching lengths of 17 meters or more, propelled by a powerful, paddle-like tail and 4 broad, flippered limbs, capable of pursuing prey across open water with devastating acceleration. Its jaws bore 2 rows of large, conical teeth, and its lower jaw could flex slightly along its midline, a feature called intramandibular kinesis, giving it an enhanced gape for swallowing large prey, whole or in large pieces. Moving through the shallower margins of the seaway and the river deltas that fed into it was the giant sea turtle Archelon ischyros, the largest sea turtle ever to have lived, with a shell measuring approximately 4.6 meters from beak to tail and an estimated weight of over 2 tons. Archelon's shell was not the solid, hard dome of a modern sea turtle, but a flexible, leathery structure supported by a framework of bony ribs, probably serving as a more hydrodynamic surface for its deep water lifestyle. It shared these waters with Siphactinus audax, a formidable predatory fish reaching 6 meters in length, and with dozens of species of ammonite, the coiled, shelled cephalopods whose extraordinary diversity in the Cretaceous seas makes them among the most abundant and important index fossils of the Mesozoic. The nights of the late Cretaceous were vast and profound in a way that is difficult for us, in our light-polluted modern world, to fully imagine. The Moon, approximately 3 to 5% closer to the Earth than it is today, a consequence of the slow, ongoing recession of the Moon from the Earth through tidal forces, would have appeared distinctly larger and brighter in the night sky, casting a stronger light across the landscape of fern and cycad than our modern Moon manages. The sky itself was darker, deeper, more populated with stars than almost any sky visible from the modern Earth. The air at night carried the heavy, complex scent of vegetation, of water, of organic decay in the warm, humid forest floor, of life in its most ancient, unperfumed form. The calls of nocturnal animals, the first small mammals skittering through the leaf litter, producing the high, thin calls of animals perpetually hunted, would have woven through the deeper, lower sounds of the great reptiles settling into their night behaviors. This was the world that stood on the edge of obliteration. This world, vast and ancient and thrumming with the accumulated evolutionary wisdom of 165 million years, was 90 days from its end. And in our story, those 90 days pass, and the end does not come. And so, the world continues, and the question becomes, what does it become? Stand at the edge of the seaway again. It is a morning in the late Cretaceous that is, in every observable way, exactly like every other morning that has come before it and every morning that will come after. The light is the same amber gold. The water carries the same warmth. The Triceratops moves through the shallows with the same unhurried gravity. And somewhere in the forest behind you, the same Tyrannosaurus Rex is beginning its slow, patient patrol of its territorial boundary, reading the scent trails of the fern-covered paths with its extraordinary olfactory apparatus, alert to every vibration carried through the ground beneath its feet. Above, in the blue arc of the Cretaceous sky, there is a light, a bright moving point of fire, tracing a line across the upper atmosphere from east to west. It is very bright, brighter than any star, brighter than Venus at its most intense, bright enough to cast faint moving shadows of the fern fronds on the ground. It moves with the steady, silent speed of something very large, moving very fast at very great altitude. Every animal near the seaway looks up. The hadrosaur herd freezes, heads raised, their dark eyes tracking the light across the sky with the ancient, deeply wired alertness of prey, animals reading an unfamiliar stimulus. The Triceratops pauses in the shallows, and then the light dims. It elongates, it fades, it disappears beyond the western horizon and does not return. No sound follows it, no shockwave rolls across the sea, no darkness falls. For the sky remains blue and full of light. The hadrosaurs lower their heads and return to feeding. The Triceratops resumes its slow wade through the warm water. In the forest, the Tyrannosaurus Rex resumes its patrol. The world does not know what did not happen. There is no sense of reprieve, no awareness of a bullet dodged across the cosmic distances of the inner solar system. The late Cretaceous simply continues, as it has continued every morning for the past 10 million years, with the unhurried, masterful patience of a world that has never been seriously threatened. The rock is gone. It has passed through the thin envelope of the atmosphere, shed some of its outer material as a cascade of brilliant meteoric fire, and slung itself back out into the dark of the solar system on a new, slightly altered trajectory. It will drift into the asteroid belt in time. It will circle the sun for billions of years to come. It will never threaten the Earth again. And so the story begins. Not with an ending, but with a continuation. Not with a catastrophe, but with the simple, extraordinary fact of ongoing life. Now the questions open before us like the seaway at dawn, wide and luminous and full of unknown depths. What does 66 million years of uninterrupted evolution look like for an animal lineage that had already been on this earth for 165 million years? The dinosaurs were not beginners. They were the most experienced large-body architects of complex terrestrial life in the history of the planet. They had already survived one mass extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic event of 201 million years ago, which cleared the competitive field and allowed the first dinosaurs to rise. They had already diversified from a small group of bipedal archosaurs in the early Triassic into the staggering variety of forms that populated every terrestrial and aerial ecological niche on the planet by the late Cretaceous. They had already crossed the Pacific Ocean and colonized every continent. They had already invented armor, had already invented elaborate cranial display, had already invented highly efficient grazing dental batteries, had already, in at least some lineages, invented feathers. What might they have invented next, given the time? Would intelligence emerge from the dinosaurian line? Not intelligence as a distant, theoretical possibility, but intelligence as an emergent property of a specific evolutionary trajectory already clearly underway in some lineages of feathered theropods. Would something that we might, in this alternate present, recognize as civilization arise from the descendants of animals like Troodon formosus, already the possessor of the most complex brain structure among the non-avian dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous? Would the mammals ever find their evolutionary opening, their Cretaceous catastrophe, serving as the great liberation it proved to be in our own timeline? Or would they remain forever what they were in the late Cretaceous, small, nocturnal, furtive, and ecologically marginal, unable to ever step out from under the shadow cast by a world still ruled by reptiles? These are the questions that will carry us forward. These are the questions that unfold across the next 66 million years of deep, silent, uninterrupted time. Let us follow them into the dark. But here is where the story gets truly strange and truly, genuinely surprising. Because the assumption buried at the heart of most discussions of dinosaurs, the comfortable, persistent assumption that reptiles were simply constitutionally incapable of the kind of neural complexity that ultimately produced Homo sapiens, that assumption was already showing cracks in the fossil record of the late Cretaceous itself. Consider Troodon formosus. This is not a hypothetical animal. This is a real animal whose fossils have been recovered from the Judith River Formation in Montana, the Horseshoe Canyon Formation in Alberta, and numerous other late Cretaceous deposits across North America. Troodon was a relatively small theropod, approximately 2 meters in length and roughly 50 kilograms in weight, but its skull tells a profoundly different story from the great tank-like heads of Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops. The brain case of Troodon was large for its body size. Its encephalization quotient, the ratio of brain mass to body mass, corrected for scaling, placed it at or above the level of modern ostriches and emus, and approaching the lower range of modern corvids and parrots. Its eyes were enormous relative to its skull, forward-facing, providing high-resolution binocular vision in low-light conditions. Its 3-fingered hands were dexterous, capable of manipulating objects with a precision that the great sauropods and ceratopsids could not remotely approach. In 1982, the Canadian paleontologist Dale Russell, working at the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, published a thought experiment that has become one of the most famous and controversial speculative exercises in the history of paleontology. Russell asked a simple, profound question. If the non-avian dinosaurs had not gone extinct, and if the encephalization trend observable in the troodontid lineage had continued at the same rate as it had been proceeding in the late Cretaceous, what might a descendant of Troodon look like today, 66 million years later? Working with sculptor Ron Sagan, he developed a detailed anatomical model of a hypothetical evolved Troodon descendant, a creature he called the Dinosauroid. It was bipedal. It had large, forward-facing eyes. It had a greatly enlarged brain case. Its hands had partially opposable digits. It stood approximately 1.4 meters tall. Russell was careful to emphasize that this was a thought experiment, not a prediction, but the implications of even the exercise itself were startling. The cognitive trajectory of the dinosaurian lineage, given sufficient time, might have led somewhere profoundly unexpected. And here is the detail that makes this not merely a fascinating historical footnote, but a genuinely breathtaking insight into the nature of evolution itself. We know the dinosaur lineage was already on a neural expansion trajectory because we can observe its modern descendants. The birds. The avian dinosaurs that survived the impact have, in 66 million years, produced brains of extraordinary sophistication relative to their body sizes, and entirely without the mammalian neocortex that we associate with complex cognition. New Caledonian crows use tools. African grey parrots develop vocabulary and demonstrate genuine semantic comprehension. Clark's nutcrackers maintain spatial memory maps of thousands of food cache locations with remarkable accuracy. The dinosaurian brain, shaped through 66 million years of post-impact evolution in birds, has repeatedly and independently converged on complex cognitive solutions. What might it have produced given 66 million years of uninterrupted, large-body evolutionary time? The evolutionary biologist Simon Conway Morris of the University of Cambridge has written extensively about the concept of convergent evolution, the tendency of life to repeatedly discover the same solutions to the same problems independently across different lineages and different continents. Conway Morris argues that intelligence, tool use, and social complexity are not evolutionary accidents but deep attractors, outcomes that natural selection will tend toward, given sufficient ecological complexity and sufficient time. If Conway Morris is right, then the question is not whether intelligence would have arisen in the uninterrupted dinosaurian world. The question is, which lineage would have reached it first? If this story is carrying you somewhere peaceful, feel free to close your eyes. The narration will guide you. And so the story unfolds, not as a single dramatic event, but as a slow, majestic tide, a cascade of ecological and evolutionary consequences spreading outward from the single quiet moment when the asteroid passed harmlessly through the atmosphere and disappeared into the dark. The late Cretaceous does not suddenly transform. It does not jolt into a new configuration. It continues as living worlds always continue, with the deep, patient rhythm of organisms born, adapting, competing, and dying across the immeasurable depths of geological time. The first 10,000 years after the near miss are, in biological terms, entirely unremarkable. The Western Interior Seaway continues its slow, long-term geological process of withdrawal, a process already well underway by the end of the Cretaceous, as the tectonic plates continued their patient drift and the seafloor gradually deepened. The Deccan Traps volcanic province in what will eventually become India continues its immense, with slow eruption. A volcanic event already producing significant quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere and causing regional environmental stress across equatorial environments. Some species in the tropics suffer locally, some populations decline. The fossil record of this period, if we could examine it in this alternate world, would show the usual background noise of ecological change, the ordinary hum of extinction and origination that characterizes any living biosphere. But here is what does not happen. The global collapse of photosynthesis does not occur. The nuclear winter does not fall. The food chains do not catastrophically cascade from the top down. The land surface remains lit, warm, and productive, and so the great dynasties of the Cretaceous simply continue. 10,000 years is, by the measure of evolution, an eye blink. But even in this interval, subtle shifts are underway. The populations of large herbivores are responding to the slight climatic variability introduced by the Deccan eruptions. Hadrosaur populations shift their range slightly northward, following the more stable thermal corridors. Some ceratopsian populations in the southern ranges of Laramidia experience reduced recruitment as the subtropical vegetation thins in response to increased volcanic aerosol loading. These are not catastrophes. They are the ordinary weather of evolution. Now move forward. 1 million years have passed since the near miss. The Deccan eruptions are beginning to wind down as they do in our own timeline, the volcanic episode lasting roughly 1 to 2 million years in total. As the atmospheric aerosols from the eruptions gradually clear, the global climate stabilizes and then begins to warm slightly above even the already elevated Cretaceous baseline. The world enters what we might describe as a super Cretaceous hothouse, a period of extraordinary warmth and ecological productivity, with global temperatures perhaps 2 degrees Celsius higher than the already warm late Cretaceous baseline. This warmth drives a spectacular explosion of ecological diversity. The angiosperms, the flowering plants already beginning their great radiation in the late Cretaceous, accelerate their spread across the global landscape. Their superior adaptations for rapid growth, diverse pollination strategies, and seed dispersal giving them competitive advantages that, under conditions of continued warmth and elevated CO2, allow them to invade ecosystems previously dominated entirely by ferns and conifers. The flowering plants bring new ecological complexity with them, a diversity of fruit types, a diversity of seed sizes, a diversity of flowering seasonality that creates new foraging opportunities for animals capable of exploiting them. And, among the animals capable of exploiting them, the cognitive theropods of the Troodon lineage are particularly well positioned. Their dexterous hands can reach into dense vegetation to extract fruits and seeds. Their sharp, high-resolution vision allows them to detect the color cues of ripening fruit across distances. Their expanding neural circuitry supports the kind of memory-intensive foraging that tracks the seasonal availability of distributed food sources. In the rich forests of Larimedia, where the angiosperm radiation is proceeding most rapidly, the Troodon lineage is experiencing intense selective pressure for precisely the cognitive traits that facilitate flexible, spatially complex foraging. The brain-to-body ratio of Troodon descendants in this alternate world is already, 1 million years after the near miss, measurably higher than it was in the parent population of the late Cretaceous. This would mean that cognitive evolution in this alternate world is not beginning at the moment the asteroid missed. It was already underway before the near miss. The ecological pressure exerted by the angiosperm radiation simply accelerates and intensifies a trajectory that was already established. Over the next several million years, the world continues its slow, rich transformation. 10 million years after the near miss, in a world we might number at approximately 56 million years before the present, a global warming event of considerable magnitude occurs. This is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or the equivalent of it in this alternate world, a rapid, geologically brief warming event driven by a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere from a combination of volcanic sources and the destabilization of methane hydrates on the ocean floor. In our own timeline, this event occurred roughly 56 million years ago and caused a global temperature increase of 5 to 8 degrees Celsius over a period of roughly 20,000 years, before gradually recovering over the following 200,000 years. In our alternate world, this thermal event occurs against a background of an already warm, the already rich biosphere. And its ecological effects are correspondingly complex. The tropical and subtropical zones of the Cretaceous world, already extraordinarily productive, become briefly even warmer, pushing the limits of thermal tolerance for some species and driving significant range shifts. The higher latitude regions experience a dramatic expansion of warm temperate conditions, allowing the great dinosaurian faunas to extend their ranges further north and south than they had previously occupied. The hadrosaur lineages, always highly successful in temperate to warm environments, diversify into new ecological niches in the high northern latitudes, their highly efficient dental batteries making them ideal colonizers of the expanding northern forests that the thermal event briefly makes productive. In Asia, the effects are particularly striking. The landmass that will one day become Mongolia and northern China, already home to a remarkable diversity of late Cretaceous dinosaurian fauna, as we know from the extraordinary fossil record of the Gobi Basin, sees a rapid radiation of new forms. Among these, a new genus of large-brained social theropod begins to appear in the fossil record of this alternate world. Call them, in the spirit of speculative taxonomy, Proto-Sauronodon, a lineage of feathered, mid-sized theropods, roughly 2 to 3 meters in length, showing the skeletal hallmarks of pack-hunting behavior. Compressed, laterally narrow skulls suggesting forward-directed vision for binocular depth perception in pursuit hunting, elongated forelimbs with dexterous digits, and enlarged brain case volumes suggesting a level of neural processing complexity comfortably exceeding that of the late Cretaceous Troodon. The Proto-Sauronodon are vocal. Analysis of their inner ear morphology, preserved in this alternate world's fossil record in fine-grained lacustrine sediments, would reveal an auditory system tuned to a broad range of frequencies, including the higher frequencies associated with complex, rapidly modulated vocalizations. They are hunting in coordinated groups of 3 to 7 individuals, a behavioral inference drawn from the association of their fossil remains with those of large ceratopsian prey animals in multiple kill sites. Patterns of bone damage and relative positioning consistent with coordinated attack from multiple directions rather than solo ambush predation. This would mean that by 10 million years after the near miss, by what corresponds to 56 million years before our present, the dinosaurian world already contains animals demonstrating pack-hunting behavior, social coordination, vocal complexity, and neural architecture, suggesting cognitive flexibility well beyond anything we observe in the living reptiles of our own timeline. 20 million years after the near miss, the geological world itself has changed in ways that have profound ecological consequences. The Indian subcontinent, which throughout the Cretaceous period was an isolated island landmass drifting northward across the ancient Tethys Sea, has made its long-anticipated collision with the southern margin of Asia. The Himalayas have begun their slow, majestic rise, a geological process that, in our own timeline, produced the world's highest mountain range and fundamentally altered the global atmospheric circulation patterns of the Northern Hemisphere. In this alternate world, the same collision occurs, the same mountains begin to rise, and the same atmospheric consequences follow. The development of the Asian monsoon system, the intensification of seasonal precipitation patterns across South Asia and East Asia, and the creation of new high-altitude environments that will, over millions of years, become ecological laboratories for rapid evolutionary adaptation. And the Western Interior Seaway, already in retreat in the late Cretaceous, has now fully withdrawn. The great body of water that divided North America for tens of millions of years is gone, replaced by an extensive system of river valleys, wetlands, and gradually developing grassland-equivalent ecosystems spreading across the continent's interior. But here, the alternate world diverges meaningfully from our own timeline. In our world, the true grasslands, dominated by the highly specialized grasses of the family Poaceae, did not achieve their global ecological dominance until the Oligocene and Miocene epochs, roughly 25 to 15 million years ago. The evolution of grass-dominated ecosystems was intimately tied to the coevolution of grass and the grazing mammals that consumed and spread it. In a world without mammalian grazing dominance, what fills the ecological role of the open grassland? The answer in this alternate world is the fern savanna. An open, sun-drenched landscape dominated by low-growing, rapidly regenerating ferns and drought-tolerant cycad relatives, interspersed with stands of broad-leafed deciduous trees along the river courses. These fern savannas, spreading across the interior of what is now North America and across the vast open corridors of Central Asia, represent a novel ecosystem type with no direct analogue in our own world. And across these open landscapes, the great herds of ornithopod dinosaurs, the hadrosaur descendants, move in formations of extraordinary scale, tens of thousands of animals grazing, migrating, and communicating in patterns that echo the great ungulate migrations of our African savanna. but on a scale and with a visual character utterly unlike anything in the modern world. 30 million years after the near miss, global cooling begins. This cooling is not caused by the asteroid. It is driven by the same orbital and geographic factors that, in our timeline, produced the Eocene-Oligocene transition and the first permanent Antarctic ice sheet. The continued widening of the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica, allowing the circumpolar current to establish itself and effectively isolating Antarctica thermally. This oceanographic change drives a gradual, sustained global cooling that, over the course of several million years, reduces global average temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. The tropical zones contract somewhat. The mid-latitude environments become more distinctly seasonal. The first patches of permanent ice appear at the South Pole. For the dinosaurian biosphere, this cooling represents a significant challenge, but not an existential one. The dinosaurs had already encountered and adapted to a wide range of thermal conditions over their 165 million year history, including the cooler intervals of the early Jurassic and the highly seasonal high-latitude environments of the polar regions. In response to the Oligocene cooling of this alternate world, the large-bodied theropod lineages adapt through changes in their insulating feather structures. The fossil record of this alternate world shows a marked increase in the density and complexity of feathering in mid to high-latitude populations of large theropods in the Oligocene equivalent deposits. Some lineages develop elaborate feathered crests and elaborate breast feather arrangements that serve both as insulation and as display structures. The adaptive radiation of feather forms in this cooling world is, in its own way, as spectacular as the adaptive radiation of mammalian fur coats in our own post-Cretaceous world. And now, 30 million years after the near miss, the social theropod lineage, the descendants of the Protosauronodon and the Troodon relatives of the late Cretaceous, has diverged into multiple distinct species spread across Asia, North America, and the northern regions of South America. The largest brained variants living in the temperate forests of Eastern Asia and the Pacific coast of North America now show a level of social complexity that, in our own world, would be comparable to the higher functioning bird species, the corvids, the parrots, the cockatoos. They live in stable social groups of between 15 and 40 individuals with complex multi-generational bonds between related individuals. They produce a structured vocal repertoire of over 200 distinct call types, identifiable through the analysis of their auditory anatomy and the acoustic signatures embedded in the fossil record of this alternate world's lake sediment deposits. Their juveniles are taught, not merely observed learning, but actively instructed in foraging routes, in the identification of productive food sources, and in the vocal conventions of their local social group. This is cultural transmission. This is the transmission of learned behavior across generations through direct instruction rather than genetic inheritance. And it is, in this alternate world, already 30 million years old. 30 million years after the near miss, by what corresponds to 36 million years before our present, the descendants of Troodon have crossed the threshold that separates instinct from culture. 40 million years after the near miss, the first truly unambiguous evidence of proto-tool use appears. In the temperate forests of what is now Western North America, populations of Eviraptor, the social, large-brained theropod lineage, whose name translates loosely as the swift creature of deep time, are consistently associated with smooth, rounded stones recovered from river gravels many kilometers from their burial sites, found in direct association with the remains of hard-shelled prey. The stones show the wear patterns of repeated use as hammer tools. Some show traces of deliberate modification, a flake removed from one edge to create a sharper working surface, in a manner that, in our world, we do not see in any animal lineage until the emergence of the genus Homo. This would mean that deliberate, purposeful modification of stone tools appears in the alternate world among a non-mammalian, non-primate lineage. It would mean that the specific neural architecture required for understanding the mechanical properties of materials, the cognitive leap that, in our world, seems to have been an exclusively primate accomplishment, is not an exclusive property of the mammalian neocortex at all. It is a possible outcome of sufficiently advanced cognitive evolution in any lineage with the right combination of dexterous manipulative appendages, high-resolution vision, and complex social learning. 50 million years after the near miss, at a point corresponding to approximately 16 million years before the present, the world is recognizably different from the late Cretaceous in its geography, but the dominant ecological players remain unmistakably dinosaurian. The continents are nearly in their modern positions. The Himalayas and the Alps and the Andes have all risen. The global climate is cooler and more variable than the ancient Cretaceous hothouse, with distinct seasonal patterns in the mid to high latitudes and a more pronounced temperature gradient from tropics to poles. The Antarctic ice sheet is well established. The great fern savannas of the interior have given way, in some regions, to open landscapes dominated by faster-growing, drought-adapted vegetation. Ecological analogues of our grasslands, but composed of entirely different plant families. And Raptor has continued its extraordinary cognitive trajectory. The most advanced populations living in the temperate forests and river valleys of Eastern Asia and Western North America now possess brains whose absolute volume and encephalization quotient place them above the modern chimpanzee. They live in structured societies with apparent hierarchies, with territories maintained not through constant aggressive assertion, but through complex vocal and gestural conventions that must be learned. Their juveniles undergo what can only be described as an apprenticeship period of several years, a prolonged developmental phase during which they travel with experienced adults and are exposed to the full behavioral repertoire of the group before achieving reproductive maturity. This extended developmental period is itself a cognitive adaptation, a biological investment in the quality of learning that mirrors, with striking convergence, the extended juvenile period of the great apes in our own timeline. And the tools are now clearly tools in the full behavioral sense of the word. Raptor populations in different geographic regions show different tool forms, different shapes, different raw material preferences, or different functional modifications that are consistent only with cultural transmission of learned craft knowledge rather than individual reinvention. The flint assemblages recovered from Raptor foraging sites in Western North America differ systematically from those found in Eastern Asian populations in the same geological stratum. The pattern is unambiguous. These are traditions. These are technologies. They are different from each other, not because the animals in different regions are genetically different, but because they have learned different things from different teachers. 60 million years after the near miss, at a point corresponding to approximately 6 million years before our present, something is walking that would stop any observer from our world entirely in their tracks. The Raptor lineage's most cognitively advanced populations have continued to diverge from their ancestral forms. The most derived variant, fully capable now of being classified as a new genus, perhaps best described as Cognodromeus, shows all of the behavioral markers that, in our own timeline, we associate with early hominid cultural emergence. They maintain semi-permanent, repeatedly used territorial base sites at confluences of major rivers and forested ridgelines. These sites show evidence of deliberate environmental modification, areas cleared of debris for regular use, elevated sleeping and observation platforms constructed from interwoven branches and layered fern fronds, food processing stations where identified stones are stored between uses rather than discarded. The platforms, the storage of tools, the modification of physical space. These are not the behaviors of an animal acting purely on instinct. These are the behaviors of an animal with a mental model of its own future, capable of anticipating its own future needs and preparing its environment in advance to meet them. The brain volume of Cognodromeus at this point in the story is estimated through careful scaling from preserved brain case dimensions at between 650 and 800 cubic centimeters. For comparison, early Homo habilis, the first stone tool-using species in our own human lineage, had a brain volume of approximately 550 to 680 cubic centimeters. The two lineages, separated by the most profound accident of cosmic geometry, have arrived at approximately the same cognitive waypoint through entirely different evolutionary paths on entirely different bodies, in entirely different worlds. But the story does not end there. It never ends there, because evolution does not reach a plateau and pause. It simply continues, patient and blind and endlessly generative, finding new configurations, new efficiencies, new possibilities in every available environment. And in the 6 million years that remain between this moment and what corresponds to our present day, the trajectory of Cognodromeus will continue into a world we can barely begin to imagine. Let the speculation slow now. Let the cascade of evolutionary steps and geological epochs settle, like sediment drifting down through still water into something quieter and more contemplative. Because we have arrived somewhere remarkable. We have arrived at the present, not our present. So with its cities and its satellites and its 7 billion years of human story, but a different present, built from different choices made by an indifferent universe on a morning 66 million years ago, when a rock drifted past and the world continued. Drift now into this alternate today. Let the senses open to it slowly as one opens to the awareness of a dream that is becoming clearer rather than fading. The shapes becoming more definite, the sounds becoming more distinct, the air becoming more palpable against the skin. You are standing in a forest, but not a forest that any living human has stood in. The trees that surround you are ancient in a way that our oldest forests cannot claim, their lineages unbroken, their evolutionary accumulation uninterrupted, and their ecological complexity deepened by 66 million additional years of coevolution and adaptation. The canopy above you is a cathedral of green and gold, 60 meters overhead, so dense that the sunlight arrives at the forest floor as separate beams of amber light, shifting slowly as the canopy breathes in the morning wind. The air is warm, not the fierce, pressing heat of the deep tropics, but the comfortable, living warmth of a temperate rainforest in early summer, carrying the layered sense of damp earth, of flowering undergrowth, of something ancient and green and deeply alive. And the forest is not silent. Nothing in this world is silent. Far away, perhaps 2 or 3 kilometers, but carried with extraordinary clarity through the humid, still air of the early morning, you hear a sound, deep, subsonic, a slow, resonant pulse, like the lowest register of an organ in a great stone cathedral, but organic, alive, rising and falling with the rhythm of breathing. It is the call of Titanosaurus magnus, a surviving and enormously diversified descendant of the great sauropod lineage. Titanosaurus magnus still walks the deep forests of what is now the Amazon basin and the Congo River system, carrying the evolutionary inheritance of the Titanosaur lineage, which was already present and thriving in the late Cretaceous, forward through 66 million years of uninterrupted biological time. Titanosaurus magnus is, by any measure, one of the largest land animals that this Earth has ever produced, in this alternate world or our own. Adults reach lengths of 30 to 35 meters from nose to tail, and their shoulder heights approach 8 meters, placing them comfortably above the forest canopy in the open river valleys, where they gather in small groups of 3 to 8 individuals around the great watercourses. Their skin, in the warm morning light, is a complex, shifting mosaic of deep brown and dusty gold, patterned in irregular, asymmetric blotches that provide remarkable visual disruption in the dappled light of the forest edge. A camouflage pattern, perhaps, that serves more as social communication between individuals, given that no predator in the living world is large enough to seriously threaten a fully grown adult. Their tails swing slowly, counterbalancing the great column of the neck as it rises and sweeps in long, graceful arcs through the canopy, deselecting the most tender new growth from the uppermost branches of trees that have never evolved a defensive height sufficient to escape them. The sound of Titanosaurus magnus calling at dawn carries, studies in this alternate world would confirm, for a distance of up to 40 kilometers through dense forest, a range made possible by the extraordinary acoustic properties of the infrasonic calls that these animals produce, traveling not only through air, but through the substrate of the forest floor itself, a subsonic communication channel that allows widely dispersed individuals to maintain contact across river basins of continental scale. In the pre-dawn darkness, before the forest warms enough for the insect chorus to begin, these calls weave through the silence of the forest like a tide, ear the signatures of individual animals recognizable to others of their kind, across distances that would challenge even the most sophisticated modern communication technology. Move now in the quietness of the imagination from the deep forest to a different kind of landscape. Travel north through the narrowing band of tropical vegetation and into the broader, more open country of the temperate zone. Here, in the river valleys and forested ridgelines of what is now the American Northwest, the same landscape of the Hell Creek Formation where Tyrannosaurus rex once hunted hadrosaurs along the margins of an inland sea that is now, 66 million years later, no more than a memory embedded in the stratigraphy of the rocks. A different world announces itself through a different set of sounds. Smoke. The thin, pale column of it rising from the valley floor, visible from this elevated viewpoint as a series of distinct smoke signatures rising from positions along both banks of the river below. And where there is smoke, there is fire. And where there is managed fire, there is something managing it. This is a settlement of Cochnodromius sapiens, the most cognitively advanced descendant of the great lineage of large-brained feathered theropods that traces its ancestry back through Evoraptor and Protoceranodon to the Troodon formosas of the late Cretaceous Hell Creek Formation. They have been here, in this valley, for many generations, long enough to have worn smooth paths through the undergrowth, long enough to have learned the seasonal rhythms of the river, long enough to have begun, in quiet and deliberate ways, to reshape the immediate environment around their base sites. They stand approximately 1.5 meters tall, roughly the height of a modern human child of 11 or 12 years, but they carry themselves with the upright, forward-leaning bipedal posture of their theropod inheritance, with a slight forward tilt to the body's center of gravity that gives their movement a quality of constant, purposeful readiness. Their bodies are fully feathered, not the sparse, quill-like proto-feathers of their ancient ancestors, but dense, complex, structured plumage of extraordinary beauty. The dorsal surface of the body is covered in deep, iridescent blue-black feathers that shift through teal and violet in direct sunlight, providing both insulation and visual identity. The ventral surface, the throat, and the lower limbs carry paler, a cream-colored plumage with fine brown barring, creating a visual contrast that plays a role in the complex visual signaling of social interaction. Their faces are arresting. The forward-facing eyes are large, proportionally much larger than a human eye relative to the face, and deeply amber in color, with a sharp, mobile iris that dilates and contracts rapidly in response to changes in light and emotional state. The jaw terminates in a slightly hooked, keratin-covered beak of moderate length, not the elongated snout of the predatory theropods, but a shorter, more versatile structure capable of delicate manipulation as well as efficient food processing. The hands, and they are unmistakably hands, not forelimbs with claws, have 3 primary digits and a partially opposable inner digit, giving them sufficient precision grip to thread a cord through a hole, to turn a smooth stone and examine its surfaces with tactile attention, to weave. And they do weave. The structures along the riverbank are deliberate constructions, frameworks of woven branches and fern fronds forming elevated sleeping platforms above the damp ground, walls of woven grass, analog and bark serving to deflect wind and rain, cleared spaces around fire-keeping areas where the fire itself is maintained through careful fuel management across days and weeks. The settlements along this river valley are occupied by groups of between 20 and 60 individuals, extended family groups whose membership is stable over periods of years, whose social hierarchies are maintained through complex vocal negotiation rather than overt physical aggression, and whose accumulated ecological knowledge is passed between generations through a process of sustained, attentive vocal instruction. They speak, not with the structured grammar and infinite generativity of human language as we understand it. The evolutionary pathway that produced cognodromius sapiens vocal communication was different enough from the one that produced Homo sapiens language that the comparison, while inevitable, can only be approximate. But they produce a structured system of vocal signals with referential specificity, calls that reliably refer to specific food sources, specific locations, specific individuals, specific dangers, and with compositional structure, the combination of individual call elements producing meanings distinct from the meanings of the elements alone. By the technical definitions of animal communication research, it is proto-language. And by the honest observation of what it allows these animals to accomplish, the coordination of group foraging, the transmission of ecological knowledge across generations, the maintenance of social bonds across distances and separations, it is, functionally, something that serves the same deep purposes that human language serves, shaped by a different history into a different but convergent form. At dusk, the settlement changes character. The foraging parties return along the familiar paths from the forest and the river margins, carrying fruits, the carcasses of small animals taken with precision-thrown stones, roots extracted with digging tools hafted with cord to weighted handles. The fires are fed. The sounds of the settlement shift from the task-oriented vocalizations of working animals to something slower, more layered, more difficult to categorize. Long melodic exchanges that pass between individuals without obvious referential purpose, that visibly reduce the physical tension in the bodies of participants, that sometimes draw groups of 3 or 4 individuals into close physical proximity while the exchange continues in the deepening dark. In our world, we would recognize something in this without being able to name it precisely. We would call it conversation, or song, or the telling of the day's story to those who were not there. We would recognize, in the glow of the fire and the exchange of voices in the warm dark, something that felt genuinely, structurally familiar. Move away from the settlement now, into the broader world. Out to the sea. The ocean in this alternate present is, in its physical dimensions, much the same ocean that exists in our own world. The same Pacific, the same Atlantic, the same Indian Ocean basin, shaped by the same plate tectonic history into similar configurations of depth and current. But the biosphere of this ocean has had 66 million more years of evolution without the sharp disruption of the KPG extinction, and the marine world carries the weight of that additional time in every corner of its extraordinary diversity. In the deep water of the tropical Pacific, Pelagosaurus rex patrols the twilight zone. The descendant of the great mosasaur lineage, Pelagosaurus rex reached full evolutionary maturity tens of millions of years ago. A stabilized apex predator whose basic body plan has remained relatively constant for the past 20 million years, the mark of a lineage that has found its optimal form and settled into it. At 22 to 25 meters in length, it is the largest marine predator of this alternate world, warm-blooded, nursing its young on nutrient-rich milk secreted from specialized glands along the ventral body surface, maintaining a core body temperature of 36 to 38 degrees Celsius through a well-developed countercurrent heat exchange system in its flippers and flukes. Its skin is smooth and dark, almost black along the dorsal surface, fading to pale gray along the underside, carrying the countershading pattern that has, through convergent evolution, are characterized the largest marine predators of every lineage in every ocean for hundreds of millions of years. Pelagosaurus rex hunts in the same twilight depths where, in our world, sperm whales descend for giant squid. The deep-sea squid lineages of this alternate world are, if anything, even more diverse than those of our own ocean. Their 66 million uninterrupted years of evolution, producing forms of extraordinary complexity, some reaching tentacle spans of over 15 meters, some equipped with bioluminescent displays of remarkable sophistication. The relationship between Pelagosaurus rex and the deep-sea cephalopod fauna of this alternate world is one of the most complex predator-prey dynamics on the planet. A co-evolutionary arms race played out in the cold, lightless deep, where both participants have independently evolved extraordinary sensory systems for navigating and hunting in total darkness. Above the ocean surface, the great wings of Chicxulub imperialis sweep the thermals along the cliff coasts of southern Europe and the Atlantic margins of North Africa, riding the reliable updrafts that lift from the sun-warmed rock faces with the effortless mastery of a lineage that has held dominion over the sky for 230 million years without interruption. Chicxulub imperialis is not a terrifying predator in the ecological terms of its alternate present. It is more analogous to the great albatrosses of our world, a master of sustained soaring flight over vast oceanic distances, spending weeks or months aloft on long migration routes between nesting colonies, descending to the sea surface to take fish and squid with its elongated beak, returning to its cliff-face nest sites only for breeding. Its wingspan of 12 to 14 meters makes it a spectacular sight against the blue of the Atlantic sky, a shadow moving across the pale limestone of the coastal cliffs that, to any observer, would carry the same quality of ancient, unhurried grandeur that the great whales carry in the waters below. And on the open, wind-swept grassland equivalents of the Central Asian steppe and the North American interior, Scutum mirabilis, the armored descendant of the ankylosaurid lineage, smaller and faster than its ancestors, roughly the size of a modern rhinoceros, moves in herds of extraordinary scale. The grassland equivalents of this alternate world are grazed not by the cattle and bison of our own landscape, but by the broad, low-slung forms of Scutum mirabilis, their armored backs catching the morning light in a shifting mosaic of bronze and brown as the herd moves in loose, coordinated formations across the open ground. They are not individually aggressive animals. Their armor is defense against the occasional ambush predator, rather than the tool of active combat, and the social dynamics of the herd are maintained through a quiet repertoire of low-frequency vocalizations and tactile signals that keep the group's movements coordinated across the vast open landscapes they traverse in their seasonal migrations. When a herd of 10,000 Scutum mirabilis moves across the open plain at dusk, the sound of their passage carries for many kilometers across the still air, a deep percussion of armored bodies against open ground that has no equivalent in our world. But the world of Cognodromeus sapiens is not only a world of settlements and fires and woven platforms beside temperate rivers. It is a world of extraordinary seasonal mobility, of knowledge accumulated across generations and carried in the body, in the memory, in the vocal repertoire, in the precise, practiced movements of hands that have learned the difference between a stone that will hold an edge and one that will not. In the warm months of late summer, groups from different river valleys converge at the great seasonal gathering grounds, broad, shallow lake margins where the fern-equivalent vegetation produces its most abundant fruiting, where the fish runs are at their peak, and where the density of food resources makes sustained cooperative foraging not only possible but dramatically more efficient than solitary pursuit. These gatherings draw between 200 and 400 individuals, a temporary, humming confluence of separate social groups whose vocal dialects are mutually comprehensible but distinctly different, whose tool traditions show the traces of separate developmental histories, that, in the intimacy of the gathering season, cross-pollinate and recombine, in ways that accelerate innovation beyond what any single isolated group could achieve on its own. At these gatherings, something happens that has no precise equivalent in the behavior of any living animal in our own world. The Cognodromius sapiens perform. Not in the sense of displaying for mates, though mate assessment and pair formation are certainly among the social functions served by the gathering season, but in a deeper, more difficult to categorize sense. In the evenings, when the foraging is done and the fires are high, and the groups have settled into the loose, overlapping clusters that characterize their communal resting arrangements, specific individuals take up positions slightly apart from the group and produce extended vocal sequences that are clearly distinct from conversational exchange. These sequences are long, sometimes lasting 10 to 15 minutes without interruption. They are structured. The same core sequences appear repeatedly, with variations that seem deliberate rather than random, and as if the performer is exploring the limits of a known form rather than generating content at random. The group orients toward the performer. The restless, post-foraging movement of the group settles. The juveniles cease their play. The adults slow their grooming and social exchanges. Something in the quality of group attention changes, as if the entire gathering has entered a different mode of awareness. Receptive, still, oriented, outward rather than inward. We would call it storytelling. We might call it music. We might call it ceremony. The Cognodromius sapiens do not, of course, have words for what they are doing. Or if they do, those words are embedded in a vocal system whose full semantics we can only infer from the behavioral evidence. But the behavioral evidence is clear enough. In this alternate present, 66 million years after the asteroid passed harmlessly overhead, there is an animal on Earth that gathers in the evenings around fire and performs for its own kind in ways that serve no immediate survival purpose and every profound social and cognitive one. In that specificity, in that quiet convergence with something we know and recognize from the inside, something shifts in how this alternate world feels. It feels, in the most careful and honest use of the word, inhabited. The gathering season ends in the shortening days of early autumn. The groups disperse back along their separate migration corridors to their winter territories, carrying with them new tool techniques, new vocal sequences, new pair bonds, and the particular kind of invisible cargo that no fossil record can ever fully preserve. The updated, enriched, recomplexified internal map of a shared world that each individual carries in the living tissue of its extraordinary brain. The paths they walk back to their home valleys are old paths, worn over centuries of repeated use into shallow but unmistakable channels through the fern and cycad understory, the same paths their parents walked and their parents' parents before them. Paths that are, in their own quiet way, a kind of writing. A record inscribed not in stone or pigment, but in the patient, cumulative pressure of countless generations of feet against the same ground, following the same remembered routes between the same remembered places in the same remembered world. Travel now further, to the margins, to the places that are not temperate, not comfortable, not the natural heartland of the Cognodromius sapiens' preferred range. Because this alternate world, like all worlds, has its extremes, its cold latitudes, its dry interiors, its high altitudes, its impenetrable deep tropics. And in every one of those extreme environments, evolution has done what evolution always does, found a way. In the high northern latitudes, the tundra equivalent zones of what is now Siberia, northern Canada, and Scandinavia, a different lineage of dinosaurian descendant has made the cold its home. The Borealopelta nordicus, a hadrosaur descendant roughly 5 meters in length, carries 30 million years of high-latitude adaptation in its bones and its biology. Its body is covered not in the sparse reptilian scales of its ancient ancestors, but in a dense, multi-layered integumentary system, a combination of fine, hair-like feather filaments at the inner layer and broader, or overlapping contour structures at the outer surface that provides thermal insulation comparable to the winter coat of a modern musk ox. Its coloration in winter is predominantly pale cream and grey, breaking up its outline against the snow-covered open landscapes. In summer, the same coat flushes with complex brown and amber patterning as the thermal pigments in the feather shafts respond to the increased ultraviolet radiation of the high-latitude summer sun. Borealopelta nordicus knows the location of every subnivean vegetation cache in its territory, with spatial precision that rivals the navigational accuracy of migrating birds. It moves in coordinated family groups of 6 to 10 individuals that maintain constant vocal contact in the near whiteout conditions of the boreal winter. And it has developed a specialized digestive system capable of extracting nutritional value from food sources so fibrous and chemically defended that no other animal in its range can efficiently process them. Go higher still into the mountain zones. The great mountain ranges of this alternate world, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, are, in their physical geography, essentially the same mountains that exist in our own world, raised by the same tectonic collisions over the same geological timescales. But the organisms that have colonized their high slopes and wind-scoured ridgelines are entirely different from anything in our own experience. Among the most remarkable is Acutidens alpinus, a small, highly specialized descendant of the ceratopsid lineage. He reduced over millions of years of high-altitude adaptation from the 9-meter giants of the late Cretaceous to a compact, sure-footed animal of roughly 80 kilograms. Its frill, ancestrally a broad display structure, has been reduced and heavily keratinized into a thickened neck shield that serves primarily as protection against the wind. Its feet have, through convergent evolution, developed broad, deeply cleated distal bones capable of maintaining purchase on near vertical rock faces of extraordinary steepness. It lives above 3,500 meters for most of the year, descending to lower altitudes only in the deepest winter, and its tolerance for low oxygen environments has been achieved through a suite of physiological adaptations. Increased blood oxygen capacity, modified hemoglobin with enhanced oxygen binding efficiency, are enlarged thoracic volume that represent an evolutionary achievement as remarkable in their own precise and specific way as the flight apparatus of Quetzalcoatlus or the binocular vision of Tyrannosaurus. Return now to the equatorial belt. Descend into the deep tropics, into the forest zones of equatorial Africa and the Amazon basin, where the warmth and rainfall are at their maximum and the biological diversity is at its most extraordinary. Here, in the steaming ancient darkness of the closed canopy tropical forest, the diversity of life in this alternate world has reached a complexity that almost defies description. The 66 million additional years of evolution that were denied to our world's tropical biosphere have produced a layered richness of species interactions, chemical ecologies, and morphological diversity that makes even the Amazon of our own world seem, by comparison, somewhat impoverished. Every available energy source, every available microhabitat, every available biochemical pathway has been found and occupied and specialized toward by lineages whose patience for the work of adaptation is simply geological. In the forest canopy, 50 meters above the floor, in the world of perpetual dappled light and constant humidity, small, agile descendants of the dromaeosaurid lineage move through the branches with the ease and precision that, in our world, we associate exclusively with primates. The Arbodromeus viridis, the green canopy runner, is a feathered, 40-centimeter-long theropod descendant whose forelimbs have evolved over tens of millions of years into structures of remarkable versatility. Their inner digits partially reversed to provide a grasping capability similar in function to the primate hand, though achieved through an entirely different anatomical pathway. Their plumage is a complex camouflage of deep green and dappled yellow gold, near perfectly matching the quality of light in the upper canopy and rendering them essentially invisible to the aerial predators that patrol the forest's upper reaches. They move in extended family groups of 8 to 20 individuals through continuous overlapping home ranges, feeding on fruit, insects, and the occasional small vertebrate, and communicating with a rich repertoire of high-frequency calls that thread clearly through the dense foliage. They are not unintelligent animals. They demonstrate object permanence, delayed gratification in food caching contexts, and a capacity for social learning that allows tool techniques to spread horizontally through groups in ways that would, to any observer familiar with corvid or primate behavior, feel immediately and warmly recognizable. Below them, on the forest floor, the ancient patient world of the giant sauropods continues as it has continued for over 160 million years, with a grandeur that makes everything else seem, for a moment, briefly small. A juvenile Titanosaurus magnus, not yet 2 years old and already 8 meters long, moves through the forest understory with the ungainly exuberance of something that has not yet learned the full weight of its own existence, its neck sweeping back and forth as it samples the vegetation at eye height, its enormous feet pressing deep depressions into the soft forest floor with every step. Its mother, 32 meters of ancient life, carrying the full authority of her species' uninterrupted lineage, stands 40 meters away, her vast neck raised above the canopy in the narrow shaft of light at the forest edge, utterly still and patient, one amber eye tracking the juvenile's movement, with the quiet attention of a parent who has learned over 20 years of maternal experience exactly when to intervene and when simply to watch. The relationship between the Titanosaurus magnus and the forest itself is one of the foundational ecological partnerships of this alternate world. The great sauropods are not merely inhabitants of the tropical forest, they are, in a very real sense, its architects. Their movement through the dense vegetation creates and maintains a network of trails, clearings, and edge habitats that dramatically increases the biological diversity of the forest by generating a mosaic of light environments within the otherwise uniform deep shade of the closed canopy. Their dung, produced in quantities that are difficult to overstate, is a primary nutrient cycling mechanism distributing the seeds and chemical compounds of the canopy trees through vast areas of forest floor that would otherwise receive them only through the slow mechanisms of gravity and water flow alone. And their feeding pressure on the canopy, the daily removal of tons of new growth from the uppermost branches, shapes the architecture of the forest trees in ways that have driven, over millions of years of coevolution, the development of extraordinary branching structures, chemical defenses, and rapid regrowth mechanisms in the tree species that have learned, generation by generation, to live alongside these ancient, insatiable giants. The night falls slowly in the equatorial forest, the quality of light shifting imperceptibly from the bright gold of late afternoon to the deep amber of evening to the profound total darkness of a tropical night under full canopy. And as the darkness deepens, the character of the forest changes entirely, not less alive, but differently alive, a different cast of characters emerging from their daytime retreats to conduct the quiet, precise business of the nocturnal world. The small mammals are here in the forest dark, still present in this alternate world, still occupying their ancestral role as nocturnal insectivores and small-body generalists in the perpetual shadow of dinosaurian ecological dominance, still unable to break free of the competitive suppression imposed by 131 million years of continuous and active occupation of every terrestrial niche by their ancient adversaries. They are diverse in the specific shadow-keeping way of animals that have had 66 million years of continuous pressure towards small body size and cryptic behavior. They are expert, they are quick, they are, in the gentle and honest assessment of natural history, extraordinary in their own modest way, but they have never been given the catastrophe that, in our world, gave them everything. Above the forest, the equatorial night sky of this alternate world is very nearly the same sky that exists above our own equatorial forests. The same stars in the same positions, the same slow turning of the constellations through the hours of darkness, the same Milky Way arcing overhead in the brief intervals when the cloud cover parts to reveal the full, impossible depth of the cosmos beyond. The Moon is here too, a fraction smaller in apparent diameter than it appeared 66 million years ago over the Triceratops in the shallows, the slow tidal recession continuing its patient, invisible work across the deep millennia, but still bright, still dominant, still casting that ancient silver light across every dark landscape it has illuminated since long before the first dinosaur took its first breath. And somewhere in the darkness of the alternate present's temperate river valleys, a fire burns. Not a wildfire, not the violent consuming fire of lightning-struck dry vegetation, but a small, tended fire, managed with deliberate care by hands that understand its properties and have earned the right to say so through generations of accumulated experience. The fire casts its amber circle outward across the cleared ground of the settlement, and within that circle, the members of a cognodromious sapiens group move and rest and speak in the low, complex murmur of a social species at the end of a long day. The juveniles sleep in the elevated platforms above the ground, their small feathered bodies gathered in loose clusters for warmth, their breathing slow and deep. The adults maintain a rotating watch at the fire's edge, not because they are in immediate danger, but because vigilance is an old habit written into the behavioral genome of a lineage that spent the first 160 million years of its evolutionary history as potential prey for something larger and faster and more certain of itself. The watcher at the fire looks outward into the dark, then upward at the stars, then, for a long moment, at nothing in particular, into the middle distance where no specific object holds the attention and the mind is free to go wherever its own private current carries it, deep into some unlit interior space that is its own and no one else's. It is difficult to know, and perhaps it is the most important difficulty in this entire story, what it is like to be that watcher. To have that specific experience of consciousness built from those specific evolutionary materials, shaped by that specific history of 66 million uninterrupted years of dinosaurian deep time. The architecture of their awareness is different from ours, built on a different neural substrate, shaped by different sensory priorities, organized around different cognitive imperatives. And yet, the posture of a mind looking up at the night sky, holding still in the dark while the fire burns low and the sleeping group breathes softly around it, reaching into the available silence for something that is not quite a thought and not quite a feeling, but something prior to both of those things. That posture, that specific quality of attentive openness toward the unknown, is something we recognize without needing to translate it. It is something we have felt ourselves in our own fires on our own dark nights, beneath the same patient stars. This is the world tonight. This is the world that was preserved by the passing of a rock through an indifferent sky on a morning 66 million years ago. It is vast. It is alive with the accumulated depth of uninterrupted time. It is rich with forms and relationships and ecological complexities that we have no language for, because we have never needed such language. It is, in the truest sense of the word, another world, not across the distance of space, but across the distance of time and across the distance of a single infinitesimally small decision made by the laws of physics on one ordinary morning at the end of the Cretaceous. The fires of the cognodromious sapiens settlements burn low in the valley below. None of the calls of the night foragers echo from the tree line. Above the settlement, the moon rises, the same moon that hung over the Triceratops in the shallows 66 million years ago. The same ancient stone, the same cratered face, patient and silver in the deep sky, and in the amber light of the fires below, one of the cognodromious sapiens raises its face to that sky, its deep amber eyes reflecting the moon, the stars, the slow turning of the world. And whether what moves behind those eyes is wonder, whether it is the specific kind of awareness that asks questions, that reaches toward the unknown, that finds in the vastness of the sky something that pulls at something deep within. is perhaps the most profound and unanswerable question that this entire alternate history opens before us. There is a word in geology, contingency, that does not belong to geology alone. It belongs to every discipline that attempts to understand the deep history of complex systems, which is to say, it belongs to biology, to cosmology, to philosophy, and perhaps most intimately to the private internal discipline each of us practices when we lie still in the quiet of the night and allow the mind to move backward through its own history, asking, what if? What if the call had been different, the road had turned elsewhere, the moment had been other than it was? Contingency is the name we give to the extraordinary sensitivity of complex systems to initial conditions, the recognition that small differences in the starting state of a system can, over time, produce outcomes that diverge so dramatically as to become unrecognizable from each other. A rock, an angle, a few minutes of cosmic timing, and from those imperceptible variations, two entirely different versions of life on Earth. The asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous is perhaps the most dramatic example of contingency in the history of life on Earth. One rock, one trajectory, one moment in the orbital mechanics of the inner solar system. And from that moment, two worlds diverge so completely that they share nothing beyond their common physics, their common stars, and the ancient patient fact of the Earth itself. The same spinning stone, the same ocean water, the same deep geological time extending in both directions without end. In our world, the impact happened. The dynasties of the Mesozoic were swept away in the course of a geological heartbeat. The small, frightened, insectivorous mammals in the roots of the Cretaceous forests survived, and from their survival came every mammal that has ever walked the Cenozoic Earth. Every whale, every bat, every horse, every elephant, every primate, every member of our own improbable genus. The 66 million years that followed the impact were, for the mammals, an extraordinary evolutionary liberation. A world swept clean of competition, an adaptive radiation of astonishing richness and speed, a flowering of biological diversity driven by the sudden availability of every ecological niche that the dinosaurs had previously occupied. And from within that radiation, after roughly 63 million years, there appeared the genus Homo. And from within that genus, after perhaps another 2 million years, there emerged the species Homo sapiens. And from within that species, after perhaps 300,000 years, there emerged the specific individual who is, right now, somewhere in the quiet of the night, listening to these words, carrying the accumulated weight of the entire Cenozoic in their DNA, shaped by every contingency and every accident that links the scurrying, warm-blooded survivor of the Cretaceous catastrophe to this specific, improbable, quietly extraordinary moment of awareness. The entire lineage that leads to you, from the first tiny, shrew-like Jurassic mammal through every generation of primate and hominid to the specific convergence of DNA that produced your specific body, your specific mind, your specific way of processing the world. Every link in that extraordinary chain was made possible by the asteroid. Without the impact, the mammals do not inherit the Earth. Without the mammals inheriting the Earth, the primates do not arise. Without the primates, the hominids do not emerge. Without the hominids, we do not stand here at the edge of deep time asking what might have been. We are, in the deepest sense, children of the catastrophe, heirs of the burning sky. And there is something both sobering and quietly beautiful about that realization. We are not the inevitable outcome of a universe trending inexorably toward consciousness and intelligence. We are one specific outcome of one specific accident on one specific planet, the fortunate heirs of a catastrophe so complete that it cleared the stage entirely and allowed our ancestors, those small and frightened things in the leaf litter, to step forward into the empty light. Everything that we are, everything that we have built, Everything that we have thought and felt and loved and wondered about across the entire span of human history, all of it exists because of a rock, because of the timing of a rock, because of the precise angle of a rock's descent through a particular patch of atmosphere above a particular shallow sea on a particular morning in the deep geological past. This does not diminish what we are. It makes what we are more remarkable, not less. Because the universe is vast and largely indifferent, and within that vast indifference, the specific accident of the Chicxulub impact on that specific morning produced, as one of its far downstream consequences, an organism capable of looking back across 66 million years of time and reconstructing, with careful scientific reasoning and quiet imaginative attention, a vision of the world that almost was. An organism capable of asking, "What if?" An organism capable of feeling the weight of the answer. An organism capable of sitting in the dark and wondering, not just about the past, but about the nature of wondering itself. We sit at the edge of deep time, and deep time does not sit quietly. It moves. It shifts and turns under the patient forces of physics and chemistry and the relentless generativity of life, producing forms and relationships of extraordinary variety, following paths that branch and split and merge and diverge in ways that no single mind could map. And somewhere within all of that branching, within all of that deep, patient, evolutionary unfolding, there is a question that keeps returning. In this telling, and in our own private moments of wonder, and perhaps in the amber eyes of an animal sitting by a fire in a valley that exists only in the imagination, is intelligence inevitable? Is the capacity for wonder a destination that any sufficiently old and complex biosphere will eventually reach through one lineage or another, through one evolutionary path or another, guided by the deep attractor of convergent evolution toward the specific kind of neural complexity that produces, as its final and most extraordinary product, the ability to ask questions about its own existence? Or is it the rarest flower in the universe, the most fragile, most improbable product of the most specific set of accidents, the kind of outcome that requires not just a functioning biosphere, but a particular kind of catastrophe at a particular moment, a particular kind of liberation from a particular kind of dominance, to clear the field for the particular kind of mammalian cognitive evolution that produced, at the very end of a very long chain of very specific contingencies, this specific kind of consciousness? We do not know. We may never know. The universe does not announce its intentions. It does not post a notice indicating whether intelligence is a common product of biological evolution across the billion star systems of the visible cosmos, or whether it is the singular, improbable, fragile flower of one specific accident on one specific world. The question remains open. It remains open in the way that the deepest questions always remain open, not as a frustration, but as an invitation, a permanent horizon that retreats before us as we approach, always giving us more distance to travel, more world to explore, more silence in which to sit and listen and wonder. The Triceratops in the shallows of the inland sea does not know that it is 90 days from extinction. It does not know that the world it inhabits is irreplaceable, extraordinary, and on the threshold of annihilation. It moves through the warm water with the complete, unhurried presence of an animal entirely absorbed in the immediate. The temperature of the water, the quality of the light, the texture of the soft vegetation along the bank, the weight of its own magnificent body in the warm shallows. It does not look backward into the deep time of its own lineage. It does not look forward into the darkness of the future. It simply is, in the full, rich, unreflective way that most living things simply are in every moment of every day of the deep and uncounted history of life on this earth. We are different. We carry the past with us, and we reach toward the future, and in the space between the two, we ask the questions that no other animal we have yet discovered asks. What were we? What are we? What might we become? And, the quietest question of all, What does it mean that we are the kind of thing that asks? Perhaps it means nothing in the vast, star-filled indifference of the cosmos. Perhaps it means everything in the small, warm, specific world of one planet, circling one middle-aged star in one ordinary spiral arm of one ordinary galaxy. Perhaps the question itself is the answer, not a solution, but a direction, a posture, a way of inhabiting the world that transforms the simple fact of being alive into something that participates. However briefly and however humbly, in the universe's own extraordinary, unending process of discovering what it is. We began tonight on the edge of an inland sea. We stood in warm water, 66 million years deep, and we watched a living world go about the magnificent, unremarkable business of existing. We asked a question, what if the rock had missed? And we followed that question for thousands of years and millions of years through the long corridors of evolutionary time, through warming epochs and cooling transitions, through the slow emergence of new intelligences from ancient lineages, through the dreamlike landscape of an alternate present populated by animals of extraordinary beauty and complexity, until we arrived somewhere in the deep quiet of this night at a world we could barely imagine, but could. We, with patience and imagination and the careful tools of science and story, just barely begin to see. That world is not our world, but in asking about it, we have learned something about our own. We have learned that we are contingent, that we exist at the mercy of cosmic chance, shaped by catastrophe, possible only because of an accident so complete and so absolute that it cleared the entire stage of 165 million years of biological achievement in the span of a geological heartbeat. And we have learned that contingency is not a diminishment, but a gift. The accident of our existence does not make us less real. It does not make the warmth of this moment less warm, the quiet of this night less quiet, the wonder of deep time less profound. The ancient earth continues to turn, patient and vast, carrying the memory of all that was and the quiet ghosts of all that might have been, carrying the KPG boundary layer in every continent's rock record, like a thin, dark signature of the single moment that made everything possible, carrying the fossils of Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus and Mosasaurus in the stone of the American West, like letters written in a language that only patient, curious creatures can learn to read, carrying also the living descendants of the creatures that survived, the birds in the morning sky, the crocodilians in the warm rivers, every mammal that breathes and moves and wonders, all of them, all of us, the inheritors of that single irreversible moment of cosmic chance. The deep time stretches out in both directions, vast and still and entirely open, longer in either direction than any human mind can truly hold, longer than any story can fully contain, older and more patient than any question we have yet thought to ask. And in the middle of all of that immensity, there is this, a quiet evening, a voice in the dark, a story about a rock that fell and a world it ended, and another world that, in the space between imagination and deep time, still breathes. The fires burn low, the world turns. The stars in their ancient positions move with the slow, unhurried certainty of things that have been moving since long before the first dinosaur took its first step on the first morning of the Triassic, and will still be moving long after. Every question we have ever asked has dissolved into the patient, luminous silence of everything that is, and whenever you are ready to explore another world, we will be here.